Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinode. Let's read a little bit from Chaitanya Shikshamrta by Bhaktivinode Thakur. So this is chapter 3, part 4. And it's entitled Relationship Between Secondary and Primary Rules. And the chapter itself is, chapter 3 itself is a discussion and an analysis in great detail of Vaidhi Bhakti. And this is part 4 of that analysis. Relationship between secondary and primary rules. Ma Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pishta Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamni Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskitadi Sudhari. What is the difference between Karmakanda and Vaidhi Bhakti? There's a great difference. Those who develop indifference to the objects of the material world become qualified for Jnana Yoga and Sannyas. And those who still have material desires are qualified for Karma Yoga. Those who have developed faith in the supreme position of the Lord and have developed detachment from material life to a good degree are qualified for bhakti. Living life by rules, designated according to qualities, the 9 stages of transformation of the body and social activities are prescribed both in Karmakanda and Bhakti. But in Karmakanda, there are also many elements which are contrary to the principles of Bhakti, such as fulfilling sense desires by worshipping many devatas, giving material respect, some types of violence to animals, and respect to persons based on birth. Service to one Lord alone, attraction for only spiritual objects, service to Vaishnavas and Brahmins based on quality, not caste, compassion and non-violence to all creatures are some of the prominent characteristics of bhakti. What is the relation of varnashram, which was previously discussed, with Vaidhi Bhakti? Such a person should take shelter of Vaidhi Bhakti and give up the rules of varnashram dharma. Or should he practice Vaidhi Bhakti for developing devotion while still following varnashram rules and duties? It was previously stated that the purport of varnashram dharma is to maintain the body, develop the mind, perform good works for society, and learn spiritual topics, all with the goal of developing pure bhakti. In that man who is bound by a material body, he must follow varnashram rules. That cannot be denied, but without the development of body, mind, society, and spirit, man's life becomes degraded. The rules of varnashram are suitable for this purpose, and therefore they should be followed. However, varnashram is not the final goal. With the assistance of varnashram dharma, a person should cultivate bhakti. It is also necessary to follow the rules of varnashram in the cultivation of bhakti. But by following the rules of varnashram, which are time-consuming, a person may not have any time left to cultivate bhakti. Furthermore, where there is some conflict of principles, what should be done? First, it should be said that without taking proper care of body, mind, society, and spirit, a person cannot perform the more elevated activities of bhakti. How can the seed of devotion, faith, awaken in the heart if a person dies prematurely, develops mental problems, and never learns anything about spirit? And if a person gives up the rules of varnashram and acts as he pleases, his physical and mental actions will be like those of a madman. he'll be engaged in the worst sins. No sign of bhakti will be visible. Thus, though varnashram dharma is somewhat engaging, it must be followed as an assistant to bhakti, and with the cultivation of bhakti, its consumption of time will decrease. Its various activities will transform into devotional actions. For a person should practice the 5 types of devotional activities to the utmost, as directed by Lord Chaitanya, while simultaneously being meticulous in observance of varnashram duties, which may take too much time. He should gradually reject those varnashram duties which are against devotional principles. And finally, being purified by bhakti, varnashram duties will become the servant of sadhana bhakti. Acting in this way, there will be no conflict between the duties of varnashram and bhakti. By the cultivation of bhakti, the life of a Brahmin and the life of a Sudra, both purified by bhakti, become equalized. The Sudra, being illumined by his state of servitude to the Lord and to the devotees, becomes equal to the selfless Brahmin. The purity of Vaishnava brotherhood will enlighten the lives of the 4 Varnas, so much so that the world will seem to be Vaikuntha. By removal of the obstacles arising from identification with body, real equality of the souls is possible. Just as atheistic moral dharma merges with theistic moral life, varnashram dharma, so theistic moral life transforms itself and becomes devoid of its previous faults in the life of a devotee. In varnashram dharma, the worship of the Lord is the only one among many rules. When this dharma is incorporated in the life of a devotee, all the rules become subordinate to the worship of the Lord. Although this change may seem very general, when faith becomes strong, the whole life of the person becomes transformed. The lives of a varnashram follower and a devotee are completely different. According to the scriptures, every human being has a qualification for performing bhakti. As devotion is the natural propensity of the soul, all attention should be paid to this matter. Thus, all persons in the 4 Varnas and ashrams are qualified for bhakti. Of course, as people outside the Varnas are also counted as human beings, they have a right to devotion as well, but the opportunities are less, because their birth, association, actions, and nature are all without proper regulation. They are extremely attached to the material modes and live like animals. Just to fill their stomach, they become selfish and violent towards others and devoid of compassion. Because their hearts are hard, bhakti becomes difficult for them to appreciate. Examples like Haridas Thakur, the hunter saved by Narada, and the story of Jesus and Paul show that such people do have qualifications for devotion. By examining their lives, however, it will be found that they endured many hardships in taking up the path of devotion, so much so that their lifespans were considerably shortened. Though all humans have a right to practice bhakti, those who follow the regulations of varnashram have a much easier time. But even though the qualification and opportunity is there, many varnashram followers do not take to bhakti. The reason is that man's life takes the form of ascending steps. Those outside the varnashram are on the lowest step. Atheist moralists are on the 2nd step, theist moralists on the 3rd step, Vaidhi bhaktis on the 4th step, Raganuga bhaktis on the 5th step. It is the nature of the soul to ascend to the next higher step, but he should not ascend prematurely or too quickly. Only after being firmly established on one step is it possible to ascend to the next step. That is why being qualified with steadiness on each level has been emphasized. When a person is qualified to ascend to the next step, he must also give up attachment to the old step. The tendency to cling to the old stage is called niyamagraha, clinging to outmoded rules. Because of this, the outcasts have no respect for the atheist moralists. The atheist moralists have no respect for the pseudo-theist moralist. And the pseudo-theists have no respect for the theistic moralist. The theistic moralist has no respect for the Vaidhi Bhaktis. And Vaidhi Bhaktis have no respect for Ragatmika Bhakti. Because of such habit, the followers of Varnashram do not respect Vaidhi Bhaktis. This does not affect bhakti itself, but is as misfortune for those who do not take up interest in their own advancement. Those at a higher stage naturally have compassion for those at a lower stage, but until the lower situated people are fortunate, they cannot give up their stage and develop a taste for the higher stage. When the consciousness of those situated in Varnashram matures into devotional sentiment, they take up the life of a devotee. But as long as they do not, they must still be said to be practicing karma. Karma is not an integral part of bhakti. When karma matures, it takes the form of devotional action, and this is called bhakti, not karma. The moment that real faith in the Lord arises, a person transcends karma. The Sandhya rites are obligatory activities arising out of the rules of moral dharma. They are not activities of bhakti arising from faith. When faith in the Lord arises, all the activities being centered on the Lord are given respect according to their contribution to this goal, or bhakti. Thus, if a devotee is listening to a devotional lecture in the evening, he does not like to interrupt that to perform his Sandhya rites. The devotee understands that there is no necessity for giving up an activity which is already fulfilling the goal of the Sandhya rites. Like karma, jnana, and vairagya are also not integral parts of bhakti because they make the heart hard, which is against the principle of bhakti. Before a person takes up bhakti, jnana and vairagya may sometimes be helpful in practice. They may also help slightly when a person first starts bhakti. The relationship of bhakti to jnana and vairagya will be shown separately. In Hari Bhakti Vilas, many angas of Vaidhi Bhakti are discussed. In Bhakti Sandarbha, all the angas are classified nicely into 9 types of bhakti. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, 64 angas of Vaidhi Bhakti are mentioned. Among those, 5 angas are considered as chief. Attachment to serving the deity, relishing the meaning of Bhagavatam with devotees, affection for devotees of the same level, and association, hearing, and serving with those of higher caliber, chanting the Lord's name, residing in Vraj. The devotee should particularly perform that anga for which he has a stronger taste, but he should be careful it does not lead to a distaste for other angas. The essence of these angas of bhakti is twofold. Always remember the Lord, never forget Him. Whatever activity encourages his remembrance becomes a rule of engagement, and whatever activity makes him forget the Lord is forbidden. By keeping these 2 rules in mind, the devotee may at one time follow a rule strictly, but may give it up later, being unattached to rules for rules' sake. The Vaidhi Bhakta are practitioners. There are 3 types: those with faith, those with steadiness, nishta, and those with taste, ruchi. Those who are faithful take shelter of a guru, take initiation, perform devotional activities. Performing devotional activities in association with devotees, the anarthas disappear. When impurities disappear, faith becomes steadiness. This intensified with spiritual desire becomes taste. This is the limit of sadhana bhakti. Taste becomes attachment, and then bhav. This will be discussed later. Among these three paths, Jnana Yoga, the path of philosophical speculation, is recommended for those who are disgusted with material life and are thus detached from ordinary fruitive activities. Those who are not disgusted with material life, having many desires yet to fulfill, should seek perfection through the path of Karma Yoga. If somehow or other, by good fortune, one develops faith in hearing and chanting my glories, such a person, being neither very disgusted nor attached to material life, should achieve perfection through the path of loving devotion to me. And there will be a series of verses here from Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. And as Bhaktivinode concludes the fourth part of chapter 3, these are verses that were cited and quoted in his supporting what he was saying in his commentaries. Impregnation, gestation, birth, infancy, childhood, youth, middle age, old age, and death are the 9 ages of the body. O Brahman Vyasadeva, is decided by the learned that the best remedial measure for removing all troubles and miseries is to dedicate one's activities to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. O good soul, does not a thing applied therapeutically cure a disease which was caused by that very same thing? Thus, when all a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which caused his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work. Whatever work is done here in this life for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord is called Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service of the Lord. What is called knowledge becomes a concomitant factor. While performing duties according to the order of Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one constantly remembers him, his name, and his qualities. There is no end to the innumerable Vedic principles, Vedic prescriptions for executing deity worship. So I shall explain this topic to you briefly, one step at a time. It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions. Such a man sees equally the Brahmin, the outcast, the thief, and the charitable promoter of Brahminical culture, the sun and the tiny sparks of fire, the gentle and the cruel. And the humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, dog, dog-eater. My dear sons, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan is the original Supersoul, Father of all living entities. Consequently, there are no impediments to pleasing him or worshipping him under any conditions, whether one be a child or an old man. The relationship between the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always a fact. Therefore, there's no difficulty in pleasing the Lord. My dear friends born of demoniac families, the happiness perceived with reference to the sense objects by contact with the body can be obtained in any form of life, according to one's past fruitive activities. Such happiness is automatically obtained without endeavor, just as we obtain distress. Endeavors merely for sense gratification or material happiness through economic development are not to be performed, for they result only in a loss of time and energy, with no actual profit. If one's endeavors are directed toward Krishna consciousness, one can surely attain the spiritual platform of self-realization. There's no such benefit from engaging oneself in economic development. Terrified, about to die, a man collapses on his bed. Although his voice is faltering and he is hardly conscious of what he is saying, if he utters the holy name of the Supreme Lord, He can be freed from the reactions of his fruitive work and achieve the supreme destination. But still, people in the age of Kali will not worship the Lord. If a Brahmin has all 12 of the Brahminical qualifications, but is not a devotee, and is averse to the lotus feet of the Lord, he's certainly lower than a devotee who is a dog-eater, but who has dedicated everything, mind, word, activities, wealth, life, to the Supreme Lord. Such a devotee is better than such a Brahmin because the devotee can purify his whole family, whereas the so-called Brahmin in a position of false prestige cannot even purify himself. Knowledge and renunciation are not qualifications for entering devotional service. Though they may be of some use in the beginning, they're not considered angas of bhakti. Surrendered souls, even from groups leading sinful lives, such as women, labor class, mountaineers, Siberians, even birds and beasts, can also know the science of Godhead, become liberated from the clutches of the illusory energy by surrendering unto the pure devotees of the Lord, and by following in their footsteps in devotional service. And that is the end of Chapter 3, Part 4, Vaidhi Bhakti.